right, start recording. We are recording now. Okay, this is chapter 20. This is our last set of notes that we have for the year. Sustainability, economics, and equity. I call this the follow the money chapter because this kind of talks about the money involved in what we do with environmental science, and it's how money has impacted sustainability throughout the years. All right, so I think sustainability is something we talked about at the very beginning in chapter 1, and I brought it up multiple times throughout the year, and it's fitting that we talk about it here at the end because sustainability, we are not living sustainably right now. We are using way more resources than can replenish themselves, and we will eventually run out of resources. Something is sustainable when it meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So right now, we are able to live on what we do, but we are compromising the future of our children, our children's children, and in the future because of how many resources we are consuming. We have to change how we use our resources, or we will eventually run out of these resources. All right, scarcity. We had the scarcity lab that we did in the last section. I put it in there because I had another lab for you to do in this section. Market occurs whenever people engage in trade. So if you've had economics already, this is going to be a slight review for you. If you haven't, we're doing supply and demand, but it's the very bare bones, the very easy part of supply and demand. We're not going to talk really in depth about supply and demand. In a market economy, the cost of a good is determined by supply and demand. And so this could be a review for you. This could be something new. So for supply and demand, your supply curve is a positive slope and your demand curve is a negative slope. And we're going to talk about the relationship between supply and demand. And so price is always going to be your y-axis and quantity is always going to be your x-axis. And you're trying to hit this equilibrium point here in the middle because you want to supply just as much as everybody demands, because in that case, you don't have a stockpile in your warehouse sitting there, or a lot of sitting on the shelves, or you don't have empty shelves because people want more than what you can supply. So you're trying to hit this this equilibrium point whenever you're supplying a product. So the supply side of this says the supply curve shows how many units that supplier of a given product or services are willing to supply. So am I going to supply more of a product, supply less of a product? There's a lot of things that go into why a business will supply more or less. If you're the only supplier of this product and many people want it, you are likely to be willing to produce many of that product. So if you kind of have a monopoly of this product, you can supply as much as you want of that product and don't have any worries about it. But however, if there's a competition for your product, you may be concerned how many you can sell and will produce less now that you're share of the market with other suppliers. So the example I always give of this is phones. The only people that make the iPhone is Apple. And most of the younger generation likes Apple products, and they buy the iPhone because they're the only ones that make it, and they can produce as much of that phone as they want, and it will always sell. Well, you also have the Android operating system, which lots of phones use. And so between Samsung and all the other brands that are out there that use the Android operating system, you may not supply as much as you want because a lot of other phones use the operating system that you use, and so it's spread out amongst them. So you may watch how many you supply of the product. So demand, the demand curve, the D curve, shows how much of a good consumers want to buy, how many of them they want to buy. Factors that determine demand include income, price of the good, tastes, expectations, and the number of people who want the good. The demand curve slopes down because as the price of the good rises, the demand declines. So as price goes up, not as many people want it, which is kind of a duh. Makes sense. If you're going to raise the price on something, people don't want it as much. So you have a negative effect there. All right. These next two slides, this one and the one after this, don't mix them up. People sometimes mix them up because they think the relationship for the law of demand and the law of supply are the same, and they have exactly opposite relationships. So the law of demand. When the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded falls. When the price falls, the demand rises. So as one goes up, the other goes down. That's an inverse relationship. One goes up, the other goes down. Inverse relationship. The law of supply, when the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good will rise. When the price of the good falls, the quantity supplied will fall. That's a direct relationship. So the supply curve has a direct relationship. One goes up, the other goes up. One goes down, the other goes down. So two different relationships, for the one for the law of demand and one for the law of supply. Don't mix them up. Equilibrium, the perfect spot that every supplier wants to be in. When the price of a good comes to an equilibrium point in the two curves, the S and D intersect on the graph. The equilibrium point, at this price, suppliers find it worthwhile to supply exactly as many of the product as consumers are willing to buy. So if you can get to that point, you're supplying just as many as being bought. You're not having to store things in your warehouse. You got just enough to do everything you need to do. All right, we have talked about externalities in many chapters this year now. Many chapters. The cost or impact of a good or service on people and the environment not included in the economic price of that good or service. So, example, the cost of using common resources such as water, air, land, or the oceans, and the costs of air and water pollution or solid waste products. This is not marked into the supply and demand curve. Prices usually don't bring these into there. So these are externalities, things that happen or costs that are incurred for the environment or for people that aren't brought into the price of the product. So you can have shifts in your curves, in your supply and demand curves. So something could happen to your market and shift the supply and demand curve from one way to the other. It could be you lose a resource, you gain another resource, there could be something happening in the world like it's going on right now, shift in supply and demand, where like toilet paper, the demand for toilet paper went up and they're trying to supply more of it. But luckily, most places are keeping the price the same and they're not price gouging. There hasn't been a lot of price gouging going on right now for a lot of products. But some products there have been, but if you go online and try and buy them. But if you go to the grocery stores and things like that, we haven't been price gouged that much. So wealth and productivity. I went through all this supply and demand stuff to get to this. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because all of that, you need a little bit of an understanding before you get to GDP and GPI. GDP is the gross domestic product. If you've had economics, you have covered gross domestic product. Those of you who are juniors and haven't had it yet, this is the value of all the products and services produced in a year in a given country. GDP does not reflect externalities such as pollution. Every country basically is rated on their GDP. How many goods and services do you produce? And that's all it looks like. Okay, how many goods do we produce? How many services do we produce? We, as the United States, used to produce a lot of goods and very little services. And now, since we are developed countries, and this is what most developed countries move into, they move from producing things to producing services. We are more a service-driven country than a product-driven country now. We're more developing countries, turn more into products, because most of our products that we purchase are made outside of the United States. So other countries, other developing countries, because it's usually cheaper to build things and create things in other countries, most companies put their workforce in other countries because it's cheaper to do it there. Well, GDP doesn't add in externalities such as pollution for whenever they're creating their products. GPI is something that's trying to remedy that. Genuine Progress Indicator attempts to address this shortcoming by including measures of personal consumption, income distribution, levels of higher education, resource depletion, pollution, and in the health of the population. So it's bringing other factors in to see how well that country is doing. So if we look at the United States, since 1950, our GDP has been rising. And that's what most financial institutions, what most other countries look at is just the GDP. Hey, we're producing a lot of goods, we're producing a lot of services, that's great. All this is going up. But if we add in these other externalities that the GPI looks like, for the last 50 years, we've pretty much been stagnant because of the externalities that we're using. We're producing a lot of pollution, we're using a lot of resources and things like that. And if you, going through, we're basically the last 50 years or so, we've been stagnant, not growing at all. So our GDP is going up, but if we look at the externalities, it's not going up. This is called Kuznets curve. Kuznets curve is what every country goes through whenever you're producing, you look at the bottom, our GDP. We're trying to increase our GDP. Every country out there is trying to increase their GDP, gross domestic product. Everybody wants to grow it because they have more trading power with other countries if their GDP is high. And then on the y-axis, you have environmental degradation. So the breaking down of the environment. If you are a developing country, you're going to be on this side of the curve because as you are building your country, we did this back in the 1860s with our Industrial Revolution, we started to burn more fossil fuels, we started to use more resources, and all of a sudden the degradation of the environment happens as we start to go up this curve. As you become a developed country, you realize Look at all this pollution I'm creating. I have dirty water, I have dirty air, I have trash everywhere. I need to start cleaning up. So in the 1970s, we go, hey, we are starting to degrade our environment. We need to pass some laws, and we need to take care of this now so we have sustainability for the future. So we start passing laws for clean air, clean water, pick up trash, things like that. And then you'll turn this curve, and your environmental degradation will start to go down. You'll hit this turning point. The United States on this side of it, where almost every developing country is on this side because they're trying to still grow their gross domestic product. So most developed countries you're going to find are on this side of it, trying to clean up their areas, where most developing countries are over here. Microlending, and you'll find a lot of companies are starting to do more like microlending, not even banks anymore. It used to be just banks that would do microlending, but you're finding a lot of companies now doing microlending, like Amazon and Google and all these different companies. The practice of loaning small amounts of money to people who intend to start a small business in less developed countries. You might go, well, why would they want to lend money to people in these countries to start these businesses? Because they have a product. If they lend money to these individuals in these other countries, and they have a product that they're producing, then they could have exclusive rights to that product and sell it. Amazon could sell it, Google could sell it, whatever company you're talking about could sell it. Because there's all kinds of furniture and clothing and pottery and all kinds of stuff all over the world that people make. And if you help them build their business, help them build their GDP, you can then get rights to their products that they're producing and then sell them for a markup back in developed countries. All right, these are our two market views. The top one is our less sustainable economy, the one that we use right now. We have a large energy input. We use tons of energy. Our ecosystem services, which we talked about a couple times throughout the year. We started at the beginning of the year with ecosystem services. We don't use them as much. We basically take them and don't let them replenish themselves because we use too much resource extraction. And then we produce and we consume and then we throw everything away. What we should get to is the bottom chart, which is a more sustainable economy. Cut down on the energy use and use more ecosystem services that can replenish themselves. Don't overuse the resource. Use less of the resource, let it replenish itself, build everything, and you'll have some waste, but you need to recycle what you can. And we are in the United States moving more towards recycling resources, and most developed countries are moving towards recycling resources, where in developed countries we're moving towards this, and the developing countries they're still using this because it's easier. It's just easier that way. I use it, I throw it away. I don't have to worry about recycling anything. And that's why we did it for many, many years, because it was just easier. This has been up multiple times this year, talking about how we produce different products. Once you extract the raw material, you have to process the material. We can make cars, we can make chairs, you can make whatever you want out of this. Then you have to transport it for sale. You use it, and then you either throw it away or you recycle it. One of the two. And hopefully more recycling now is happening than just throwing it away and putting it in a landfill. Environmental worldviews. There's 3 different views that pop up on the AP test. And depending on who you are, you might fall into one. You should fall into one of these. And it might be a mixture depending on the situation you're in. Most businesses in the world hold this top view, which is anthropocentric. This is called the human-centered view. Considers that human beings have intrinsic value and nature should provide for our needs, saying that the earth is here for us and for us to use as we want to use it. It should provide everything for us and we're just going to take it. That's the anthropocentric. Biocentric is more life-centered, saying that humans are just one of many species on earth, all of which have equal value. Every species on the earth has equal value. And then you have ecocentric, which is looking at earth-centered value. Places equal value on all living organisms and the ecosystems in which they live, and it demands that we consider nature free of any association with our own existence. That we are separate from nature, and nature has its own existence, and it's not just something that we can just take from. So these are the 3 environmental worldviews that can be taken. All right. World agencies. We brought these up multiple times this year. The United Nations, remember this started in 1945. Dialogue between countries. It now brought some place for countries to talk about things, and now environmental issues are actually brought up in the United Nations now because they have the United Nations Environmental Program, which started in the 70s. Remember, I've brought this up in class multiple times. Most of in the United States and almost worldwide, most of the laws pertaining to environmental programs started in the early 70s. The World Bank started in 44, basically to help rebuild after World War II. The World Health Organization, the WHO, also came around, which we just started. The United States just said that we're not going to contribute money to anymore, which is kind of scary. The World Health Organization, which is trying to help improve health worldwide, and the United Nations Development Program, basically saying we will help countries through development. Next, we have state-run agencies. First is the Environmental Protection Agency. You're going to do a lab this week over 4 different agencies in the United States, one of them being the Environmental Protection Agency. You're going to look at the people who lead these agencies and what these agencies actually do. So the Environmental Protection Agency started in 1970. It's government efforts related to the environment, including science, assessment, and education. And then you had OSHA that started in 1970 also to give us a safe workplace, basically, saying that the company you work for has to make sure that you have a safe environment to work. And then the Department of Energy basically looks at ways that we produce energy, and it used to give loans out for companies trying to come up with alternate ways other than fossil fuels. And when the newest administration that we have came into power, they stopped all the loans to new development of new types of energy. They went back to looking at just fossil fuels. So those are the U.S. agencies that we look at. Major U.S. legislation. This is a great chart if you're studying for the AP test. This is basically tells you the different acts and agencies that are out there that you can look at, and all of these pop up on the AP test that you have to write about. All right, this is called the triple bottom line, and they hold off on this until the very end of the year because it's changed over the course of existence of us having businesses. The triple bottom line basically says to take into account social, environmental, and economics when making business and economic decisions. For a very long time, businesses only had to look at the economics of their decisions. Is it going to make us money? If it's going to make us money, we're going to do it. And that's the only thing they had to look at. Well, with the advent of, we're going back many years, we had newspapers, we had the telegraph, we had ways to get information out to people. It might have taken a while, but you could get information out. You could start to look at the social aspect. What do people think of our business decision? And now come to the current day that as soon as a decision is made, with the advent of the internet and with TV and with radio and all this through the years, people know businesses' decisions almost instantly now. You can look at any social media page, and if a business does something, you can find out the second that they do it. It's basically you can see what's happening. And so businesses now aren't just looking at economics, but they're also looking at social reactions to what their business decisions are, which could have a positive or negative effect on what their business decisions will be. And now with the help of social media, environmental issues are starting to creep into it even more. With resource depletion and ecosystem depletions and things like that, that the different decisions that businesses make have to bring all 3 of these into account because we have laws now that protect the environment. We have social crusaders that are out there saying this is what's happening to the environment, and they're able to show what companies are helping or hurting the environment as they go through. So this is what's called the triple bottom line, and trying to get businesses to take all 3 into account when they make business decisions. All right, Millennium Development Goals. If you took humanities your freshman year, Ms. Jennings probably talked about these with you. These have been around for many, many, many years. They are goals. Do we think we're ever going to reach 100% of these? No. But that doesn't mean you don't stop trying to reach these goals. The first one, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. There's no way we're ever going to get rid of 100% of poverty and hunger. We can still try to do it, though, because it will make people's lives better. Achieve universal primary education. Everybody should learn to read and write. Everybody. Does everybody? No. And are we ever going to get to 100%? Probably not. But that doesn't mean you stop. Promote gender equality and empower women. There's a lot of this going on right now. There's a lot of movements giving women more education, giving more power, more business sense. A lot of the leaders in the environmental movements are women. A lot of this is going on right now. Reduce child mortality. This is the WHO has helped tremendously with this and trying to reduce child mortality rates. And over the last 50 years, those have gone down, but they're not zero. Improve maternal health. So in pregnancy and things like that, we do a lot more. There's still places around the world that a woman can get pregnant and never see a doctor, even after she gives birth. The the mother and child may never see a doctor in the lifetime of when they're alive. So this is another thing they're moving to help with. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Well, with what's going on right now with COVID-19, this is an ongoing battle. We're never going to 100% wipe out any of these diseases, but we have to keep trying. Ensure environmental sustainability. We have to have this, or future generations, we're going to struggle, and you're going to have loss of life because of the use of resources that we're doing now. You can have loss of life later because they're not going to have enough resources to live. Develop a global partnership for development, sharing our ideas, sharing our research around the world, which companies really don't do. They don't share. If they research something, they generally don't share the information. All right, environmental justice, the inequitable distribution of pollution and other environmental degradation with adverse effects on humans and ecosystems. What this fault boils down to basically is those who have the least usually have the brunt of the environmental problems, because that's where companies a lot of times move in and chew up the resources, put more pollution, put more adverse effects on the population in those areas, because they usually don't have the voice to fight it or the money to fight it. People that are lower incomes and minorities that have a disproportional exposure to environmental hazards. And this has been going on for a very, very long period of time, that basically it's easier to manipulate these areas and put our pollution there and move into these areas and hurt the environment than in people that have a louder voice, I'm going to say, not a better voice, but a louder voice to do this. And it's not right. And there are several organizations that are speaking out against this. And throughout the years, this is cleaned up. In the United States, it's cleaned up quite a bit, but in most developing countries, this is where a lot of this happens, because you're looking at lower income and minority countries that a lot of this happens in. And that is the notes, people, for this unit. So that's chapter 20 in a nutshell. Make sure you do all the work this week. Everything is due Sunday by midnight. Thank you.